There are moments in our lives where progress feels impossible, doesn't it? Like sometimes for some people in your career, progress feels impossible. It's like, man, I've been in this job, in this role, making this amount for as long as I can remember, and I'm done with it, right? It's like progress feels impossible. Sometimes progress in a relationship feels impossible. It's like, I just feel like we just been circling around the same mountain, like in our relationship. We haven't moved, we haven't gotten any closer, we haven't gotten any further apart. It's just, it is what it is. For some people, it's progress physically, right? Like you've been on every single diet known to man, and you can't gain or lose all that much weight. It is what it is. It's just it is, you know? It's like I see progress, but I can't make progress. For some people, it's progress financially. You do everything you can to save, and as soon as you have like a little bit saved, something else breaks, and it ain't ever small then when it breaks, you know? Like it's like boom, and there our progress went. Sometimes progress feels impossible. And I think sometimes for many people, progress spiritually feels impossible. There are many people, maybe even you, if you'd be honest for a second, that progress spiritually, growth spiritually, knowing God more, seeing God shape your life feels impossible. It feels like every time you take a little bit of a step forward, you take like 3 steps back. And it's like, I want to know God more. I want to change. I want to grow. I want to be different. I want to be free. Some of us, man, we've been bound up by the same thing for a long, long time. And it's like, I want to make progress, but I can't get free. Well, today is going to help you because I have this firm belief that God can set you free. And I believe that's available to every single person today. Every single one of us. Whether today is your first time in church, maybe in a long time or ever, maybe you come on the regular, maybe you have a faith in God, but it still feels like getting forward, moving past this just doesn't seem to happen, and you don't know why. I have news for you. God can set you free. But there's a couple things I need you to know about God before we dive in, because a lot of people have a mischaracterization of our God. And so if you're taking notes today, and today would be an incredible day to take notes, I would write this down, that God sees you as you are. Do you know that? That God sees you, every one of us, as we are. There's no fooling God. You didn't trick God by doing your makeup a little different. Like God knows who you are, you know? Like you deleted a few posts off of the Twitter. Guess what? God still knows what's in your heart. You know, like he knows you. He sees you as you are. Some folk that scares them. Does he really know about? Yeah, he knows. He sees you as you are. But there's some good news with that. You can write this down too. God loves you as you are. Not only does he see you as you are and see you in your dysfunction and see you in your addiction and see you in your struggle and see you in the stuff that you ain't told nobody about, but he sees you as you are, but he loves you as you are. Sometimes we get it twisted. We think that God will love us once he sees something that he likes. No, he sees you as you are and loves you just as you are. But there's even better news on the backside of that, and it's this. I'd love for you to write this down, that God won't leave you as you are. He sees you as you are, with all of your mistakes, with all of your struggle, with all of my insecurities and insufficiencies. He sees me as I am, and he loves me as I am. And that's good news. But guess what? What's even better is he loves me so much he won't leave me as I am. He actually wants to change me. He actually wants to grow me. He actually wants to set me free. Which would lead us to a very important question. How then does God change us? How does God change us? How does God go about changing you and changing me and seeing us get free from stuff that binds us and seeing us take steps forward to where we don't look like how we used to look? You know, some people, they hadn't changed spiritually in a decade. You know? Some people, man, they've been following Jesus for 2 years. The only problem is all 2 of those years have looked exactly the same. It is because you're not allowing God to change you. There should be a moment on the regular where you look at your life, you look at yourself, you look at your progress, and you go, I don't even recognize the person that I am. You know? Because I know me, and I'm stingy. But I'm not stingy anymore because God is changing me. You know, I know me. I used to struggle with that so much, and I don't even think about it anymore. Look what God has done. See, God changes us. But how does he go about changing us? Well, see, there are two things that we get a little confused. And if I could have just a second to teach you a little theology, and then we're going to dive into this thing and get to work today. But there's a moment when you put your faith in God. The moment you put your faith in God, it's a moment that we call salvation. And in that moment, you are changed and you are saved. It's not because of anything you've done, but it's because of the good grace of God. In fact, Paul actually says that it's by grace that we've been saved through faith. It is not of yourself. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that nobody can boast about it. In other words, the moment you get saved, God does that. But then there's this ongoing process of growth, of change, of God setting you free. And that's called, it's a big word, but just roll with me for a second. It's called sanctification. And that's where God begins to make you look like he wants you to look. That's when God begins to change you. That's when God begins to set you free. That's when God begins to help you not be addicted to the things you used to be addicted to. That's when God helps you not struggle with the things you used to struggle with anymore. That's when God takes a heart of stone and begins to soften it and make it pliable, something he can use. That's when God does that. It's through this process of sanctification. What does God use then to change us? How does this happen to us? What happens through the combination of two things that we are going to spend the next few moments looking into together. Two things that quite honestly feel like polar opposites, but yet they are connected and joined at the hip. In fact, they must be to be effective. What God uses to change us is a combination of grace and truth. Grace and truth. Not like a little bit of one and a little bit of the other, or not a lot of bit of one and just a little sprinkling of the other on top. No. Grace and truth. In fact, it was John, the writer in the New Testament, who penned some words about Jesus. In fact, at the beginning of his gospel, when he's embarking on this explanation of who Jesus is and what Jesus did to the whole world, that was his audience in mind. He begins to write this, and he begins by setting up the person that Jesus is. And he makes this note in John chapter 1, verse 14. He says it like this. He says, "The Word became flesh and took up residence among us." It says that we observed his glory, the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. That was literally his definition of Jesus, that Jesus came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, if you think about it for a second, grace and truth don't really feel like they would go together, do they? They feel like it'd be one or the other. But that's not the way John defines Jesus. That's not the way John describes Jesus. It says that Jesus came from the Father and he was full of grace and he was full of truth. There's a couple things I need you to know. I'd love for you to write this down. That full of one is easy, isn't it? I mean, grace and truth seem to be disconnected. Grace and truth seem to not have much in common. So to be full of one is quite easy. For you to be full of one, it's quite easy, isn't it? It's easy. Some of you know people that are full of grace, right? You like them too, because they're nice. They've probably never said a cutting word to you, have they? It's always so good to see you in their eyes. You know, they're just full of grace. You can mess up and it's like, it's okay. They maybe feel soft to some of you. Some of you, there are people that you know they're full of grace and you take advantage of them, but that's another discussion. But you know some people, they are full of grace. And all they give is grace. And quite honestly, it's easy to be full of grace. It's easy to be full of truth. Some of you know some people like that. Maybe you are a person like that. I just say it how it is. That's the truth. I'm just going to tell you the truth here. You know some people like that. You work for some people like that, don't you? I'm just speaking the truth to you. I'm just telling you the truth. We got to do better than this. We got to fix this. I'm telling you the truth. And it's easy to be full of truth, isn't it? It's kind of easy just to say, this is the hill that I'm going to die on. I am going to always tell you the truth. I don't care if it hurts you. I don't care I'm going to tell you the truth. It's easy to do that. You may not have any friends, but it's easy to do that, you know? Ain't nobody like you. But you speak the truth, because being full of one of those, grace or truth, is easy. But full of both is messy. To be full of grace and full of truth is not the cleanest operation to dive into. Because sometimes to offer someone full grace would almost seem like you are abdicating the truth. And sometimes to offer someone all of the truth will appear like you have forgotten who they are and are no longer treating them with grace. But it is possible. It is just messy. Do you like sandwiches? Anybody like sandwiches? I know you're probably hungry, right? Yeah, my hunger hadn't kicked in yet, but it probably will as soon as this illustration is done. I love sandwiches, and one of my favorite sandwiches is peanut butter and jelly. I love peanut butter and jelly. Like, I know you're thinking, how old are you, 7? Maybe. But I love peanut butter and jelly. In fact, to be completely honest, I don't love peanut butter and jelly. I love peanut butter and preserves. Yeah, I like bougie peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You know what I'm saying? Like, kind of like little seeds up in there. It's great. Raspberry, blackberry. Oh, it's so good. Peanut butter and jelly. I love it. I eat them multiple times a week. And I have for years and years and years and years and years, and probably will my whole life. I love peanut butter and jelly. But I'll tell you this, finding people that like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches is quite easy. In fact, many of us probably do. In fact, that would be a very nice pick if I was trying to feed everybody something real quick. It's like, let's make peanut butter and jelly, because most people like it, unless you got little allergies, and I ain't talking to you, just be quiet. But I love peanut butter and jelly. But I don't know many people that like just straight peanut butter sandwiches. Have you ever had that? Now, some of you may like it. Some of you may have read somewhere, Men's Health, that it was like healthy for you, and that was going to help you like turn into the dude that was on the cover, be all swollen, whatever. And that's fine if you got little weight gain, weight loss reasons for it. That's fine, but it don't taste good. Like a straight peanut butter sandwich is like, you know, it's not good. And to be quite honest, neither is a jelly sandwich. Ew, you know? Like, I mean, I like strawberry jelly as much as anybody, but like, that's nasty, you know? It's nasty. Just to get peanut butter is, ugh. Just to get jelly is kind of, but you put them together and it's one of the greatest things on this planet, right? Because there's somehow when these two things, one got a little protein, the other was kind of sweet. You put them together and oh my goodness. Now, when I make peanut butter and jelly, there is a right way and a wrong way to make it, because I've eaten other people's sandwiches they have made for me before, and sometimes people don't make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches right, because they be putting the peanut butter and the jelly on there real thin. You ever had that? Like they breathe on it with peanut butter. It's just like there's a dusting of peanut butter across this. No, do not dust this with peanut butter. Like I need waves of peanut butter up on my sandwich. You know what I'm saying? Like I will get the largest spoon I can fit into the jar and scoop out the preserves and slap that on that bread and just kind of spread it around. I just need the whole thing covered, and it need it covered thick, because I want, when you put the peanut butter and the jelly together, I want it to kind of squeeze out the side. If it ain't squeezing out the side, you ain't eating your peanut butter and jelly right. You know what I'm saying? Like you need to take a bite and some fall out the left side, just a little bit, just a little. I ain't all of it, but just a little bit. Like, I'm so good. And when you make a sandwich that way, it's a little messy, but it's the best. It's the best, because there's this overflow that happens when you give your sandwich a full dose of peanut butter and jelly, a full dose of it. Not trying to get them in balance. How many milligrams of peanut butter have we put on here in correlation to our jelly? You ain't worried about that. Give it a full dose. Don't worry about whether it's nice and thin on both. No. A full dose. Would somebody just say full dose? Come on, say it a little louder, like maybe there's something more to this than just peanut butter and jelly. Would you say full dose? You see, that's what John said Jesus came and did. He gave a full dose of grace and truth. For Jesus, it wasn't grace or truth. He wasn't trying to get his grace in balance to the amount of truth that he had given, or get his truth to catch up to the grace that he had given. It was a full dose of both. A full dose of grace and a full dose of truth to people he interacted with. It was a full dose of grace and a full dose of truth. Everywhere he went, every opportunity he got, it was a full dose. Full dose of grace and truth. Not one or the other, both and. And it got messy sometimes. But you have to have them together. You have to be willing to embrace the mess to get what can come about on the other side. Because without truth, grace is a luxury. That's why you need them both. See, people that want to just be grace, that's great. But understand something. Without truth, grace is a luxury. I do not see my need for grace if I do not know the truth. But without grace, truth is a liability. In other words, there is nothing I can do with this truth that I've received unless I get some grace in the process to help me digest all of this truth. So how did Jesus handle this? What did it look like in Jesus? Well, if you were to read the Gospels, read Matthew, read Mark, Luke, and John, they're found at the beginning of the New Testament. And these are just men who took it upon themselves to write down the story of Jesus from their perspective to their audiences. And you will find story after story, interaction after interaction, teaching after teaching, where Jesus comes and he unloads more grace than you can handle and more truth than you can handle. He never tried to balance it. You'll never see Jesus say, verily, verily, I say unto thee, I have given thee enough grace. He never said that. Full dose of grace, everything he had, and a full dose of truth, everything he had. Why? Because it was when the two of those came together, and it got messy. It was when the two of those came together that the change that was needed could happen. And I want to show you that for a few moments. In the book of John, chapter 8, there are many places we could go, but I believe this story today is going to be very, very powerful for some of us, for many of us. I hope all of us. But it's John chapter 8. For some of you, this is going to sound a little bit familiar to you. You may have heard this particular story before. Some of you won't, and there will be some oddities to this story. You're like, well, what's going on? Well, give me a second. I'm going to clear up several of them. But in John chapter 8, this is what goes on. And it's a loaded scene. But it says it this way. It says, at dawn, Jesus went to the temple complex again, and all the people were coming to him. He sat down and began to teach them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, making her stand at the center. Teacher, they said to him, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say? They asked this to trap him. They weren't asking it because they were curious. I'll tell you why in a minute. They were asking to trap him in order that they might have evidence to accuse them. Jesus stooped down and started writing on the ground with his finger. When they persisted in questioning him, he stood up and said to them, the one without sin among you should be the first to throw a stone at her. Then he stooped down again and continued writing with the woman in the center. When Jesus stood up, he said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, Lord, she answered. Neither do I condemn you, said Jesus. Go, and from now on, don't sin anymore. This is a powerful story. But there's something I need you to see about Jesus here that's very important for you to understand. Because I think sometimes we think of Jesus as being the poster boy, being the mascot for the Christian faith. Like he's just some image and some representation. But understand this, Jesus didn't just represent grace and truth, he demonstrated it. He didn't just represent it. He wasn't just like, this is what you should think, this is what you should know. I'm the mascot for grace and truth. No, he demonstrated it. And he demonstrated it here in such a loaded way. See, this particular story in John 8 actually begins back halfway through John chapter 7. Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's there for a feast. In Jewish customs, there were many feasts they would celebrate every single year, and this was the Feast of Succoth. And it was a 7-day feast, and what John tells us about halfway through John 7 is that Jesus actually stood up on the last day of this feast and began to teach. This was the day before this happened. And he began to teach, and as in his teaching, he was telling people who he was. He was telling people, I have come to fulfill the prophecy that God has said that there's going to be a Messiah to come, and I am he. And he's quoting Isaiah and doing all of this. And there are people around who are leaning in. There are Roman guards around because Rome was in control, and they're watching this. And then there are these Pharisees and Sadducees who feel very slighted and frustrated at Jesus coming and making these kind of claims. And so at the end of this, there are all these people around. And John tells us that Jesus goes back to the Mount of Olives and that the Pharisees and Sadducees were frustrated and began to talk amongst themselves on their way back to their houses. What were they talking about? They were devising this plan. They were trying to figure out a way to trap Jesus because Jesus to them was a problem. Because Jesus to them was going to mess up everything they were using to control people. And so the next morning, Jesus comes back because the way the Pharisees had interpreted God's law about these feasts is they actually took the first day after a feast would end and celebrated it as a Sabbath unto itself. So not only did they have 7 days of this feast, this day when Jesus is there with this woman caught in the act of adultery, kind of locally, it's known as a Sabbath day. And the most important thing on a Sabbath day to those Pharisees and Sadducees is this, is that you do not work. You don't work. And they made laws as to what work was and what work wasn't. They kind of drew all these lines. They said, you don't work. And so then they bring in this woman, and Jesus is just there trying to teach because a lot of people were curious about what Jesus was saying. So that's why he came back the next morning. He came back the next morning to continue teaching these people. But they wanted to bring this in and kind of create this moment where they were going to trap Jesus. And they thought they had figured it out because they brought this woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. Now, without being too graphic, there is a little confusion in this part of the story because it's like, where's the other person? Because how are you going to catch somebody in the act of adultery and only bring one person there? So did they frame her? I don't know. But clearly to them, people didn't matter. What mattered to them was their law. And that's the problem. What mattered to them wasn't even the life of this woman. They would rather this woman lose her life in order to work their system, in order to trap Jesus, than to actually care for this woman in her life. So they bring her to Jesus, wanting Jesus to issue condemnation on her on the Sabbath, wanting Jesus to make a proclamation about her. The problem was either way Jesus would pick, he would have gotten in trouble in their eyes. See, if Jesus would have said, yeah, go ahead and stone her, that's what the law says. Well, the Jewish people would have been like, yeah, you chose the right answer. The only problem was there would have been Roman guards all around this place watching it because they were in the temple complex. At the end of a feast, it would have been heightened security, SWAT team out back. Like there would have been a lot of Roman eyes on this thing. And if Jesus was the one who would have started this, he would have gotten in trouble that way with the Roman government. However, if Jesus says, forget Moses and his law, then he would have gotten in trouble not only with those Pharisees and Sadducees, but any Jewish adherent who would have said, this is not a real rabbi. He is not one who holds true to the Jewish law. So Jesus shows not only his understanding of what God said, not only the understanding of what Moses had interpreted this as, but he also understood the way they were interpreting this law then and there. Because Jesus kneels down on the ground and starts writing in the dirt. You say, what did he write? I don't know. Anybody that's ever told you they knew what he wrote, they don't know either. They were just making it up because it sounded good. But I can tell you why he wrote. See, he wrote in the dirt because the work of a Pharisee or a scribe was to write things down, particularly the scriptures, particularly thoughts about God. However, for a scribe or a Pharisee to not work on the Sabbath would mean to not write. However, their local interpretation of this law was that you could not write on pen and paper, if you will, but you could write in the dirt because it was not permanent. And so when Jesus kneels down on the ground and he starts to write in the dirt, he starts to say, what's he writing? I don't know. He may have been writing that law back to him. He may have been drawing stick men. I have no idea what he was drawing. But he starts writing in the dirt. Why is he writing? He's writing to show them, I understand your law better than you do. And I'm about to show you what the law was actually supposed to be all about. Because here they bring a woman who they do not care about. They simply want to use her for the benefit of their law, for the benefit of their religion. They don't care if she loses her life because they just want to use her to trap Jesus. And Jesus is like, no. What I'm about to do is I'm about to unload grace and truth, which is the way this thing was supposed to be from the beginning. And so he says, why don't the one without sin cast the first stone? And he turns it onto them. He's not about to allow religion to win. He turns it onto them, and now they don't want anything to do with it because they don't want to be in trouble with Rome, and they don't want to be in trouble with the crowd of people who are around. So they back away. And then Jesus looks at this woman and says, I don't condemn you either. He offers grace. He stood in front protecting her. She had no idea what was going on here. She thought she was the one on trial. She had no idea they were coming to trap Jesus. Jesus knew it all along. He stepped in and offered grace. Neither do I condemn you. But then he offered truth as well. The same truth. Watch me. This is so important. The same truth that the Pharisees brought to her, Jesus brought to her as well. He said, why don't you go from here and don't sin anymore? Jesus didn't say, hey, it'll be all right. Don't worry about it. He said, you go and sin no more. The same truth presented in two different ways, also providing two different outcomes. It's the difference between what Jesus offers and what religion offers. You see, religion will use the truth to kill you. In fact, some of you, the reason you walked away from church, you walked away from faith, you walked away from this whole like God or whatever, had less to do with God, less to do with Jesus, less to do with your faith, and more to do with the way religion put its like ugly little hand around your neck. And you're like, this can't be God, I'm out. Because religion will try to take the truth and it'll use it to kill you. But watch me, Jesus will use the truth to free you. Jesus will take the same truth that religion tries to take and use to kill you, and Jesus will take it and use it to set you free. Some of you probably thought that grace is what freed you. No. Grace doesn't free you. Grace gives you the opportunity to receive the truth that you need. But the closer you get to the truth, the freer you are. Let me say it in a way you may never forget. You will only be as free as you are honest. Some of you today, the reason you are so bound up, the reason you feel like you can't change, the reason you feel like you can't be free has nothing to do with grace and everything to do with the fact that you won't be honest. Because you will only be as free as you are honest. See, Jesus didn't just skirt around the truth and choose grace. He offered a full dose of grace and truth. Grace that made the truth palatable. Truth that made the grace necessary. Grace and truth. And you will only be as free as you are honest with the truth. See, some of you today are struggling. And you're not free in this moment, not because you're not saved, but because shame has so wrapped itself around you and over you. And you feel shame about something. Maybe something you did, maybe something you said, maybe somewhere you were, maybe something that happened to you or something that happened because of you. And you feel shame. And the enemy has tried to lie to you for months or years, telling you, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. If they knew, they wouldn't like you. If they knew, they wouldn't let you back. If they knew, they wouldn't be your friend. And he's used shame to bind you up. Here's the problem. Until you get honest with the truth, you'll never be free. But if you could get honest, you could get free. James actually said to confess our sins one to another and pray for each other so that then in and through that you may be healed. See, it's when you get honest that you get free. It's not that it wasn't that big of a deal. No, it was a big deal. But the closer you get to that, the closer you get to explaining, I know I messed up. I know I let God down. I know I shouldn't have done that. There's freedom that comes into your life. Some of you are sitting here today and you're depressed. And the reason you're depressed is because you have not gotten help with your depression. And you've been trying to hide it. You've been trying to cover it up. You've been trying to act like it's not a big deal because maybe somewhere along your little journey, somebody told you that you shouldn't be depressed, that you should just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or you should just get over it. Or maybe you should just pray about it. And if you prayed about it enough and you really love God, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. He would set you free. I'm here to tell you, you're depressed. And the reason you're still depressed and not free isn't because depression isn't real. Isn't because that didn't happen to you. No, it happened to you. The problem is you haven't owned up to the truth that you are depressed and gone and gotten the help that you need. So freedom hasn't entered your life like it needs to. Some of you are filled with anxiety today for the same reason. Some of you are bitter today over an offense that happened weeks ago, months ago, years ago. And the reason that bitterness is now almost the core characteristic of your personality is not because God doesn't have grace to set you free. He has the grace. The problem is you haven't gotten honest enough to get close enough to the truth where you can get free and realize they really did hurt me. And that really did make me mad. And I've talked to them, and I've talked to someone, and I've given forgiveness to them because I don't want bitterness to grow within me. Some of you you're hurting. And the reason you're hurting is real. The problem is you haven't gotten close enough to the hurt to actually be free. And I believe today that God can set you free. But he can only set you free when you get honest about why you're bound. It's grace and truth. It's grace and truth. Some of you live your life so worried about money. Every day you think about it. You make more money now than you've ever made in your life, but you're still obsessed with money and will we have enough? And the reason is because you haven't gotten close enough to the truth, that you haven't allowed God to set you free from that by making you generous. Because once you become generous, you actually realize that stranglehold that money has on the inside of you actually becomes free, not when you get more, but when you actually begin to give. But you would rather look generous than be generous. The problem is you're still bound up on the inside. See, Jesus didn't tell her the truth so she would be condemned. Jesus told her the truth so she would be free. The woman caught in the act of adultery. It would have been very easy to swing this over to the grace side and say, you know what? This probably isn't even real because they didn't bring the other person. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't look for these other outs. What he did is he stepped in with grace and presented her the truth. And the closer she got to that truth, the closer she would get to being free. That's why Jesus' last word to her was, go and sin no more. He didn't act like she had done nothing wrong. He didn't act like everything was fine. He said, you need to go from here and don't do that anymore because it's binding you up. Don't do that anymore because it's going to hold you back. Don't do that anymore. See, God can set you free today if you'll be honest. If you'll be honest. If you'll, rather than cover up your anxiety, rather than covering up your offense, rather than covering up the fact that you lie, rather than covering up the fact that you're hurt, rather than covering up the fact that you're addicted, rather than covering up all of these things, if for a moment, a vulnerable moment, you would realize I am hurt. I do feel shame. And I need God to set me